All right, our second to last EdPuzzle, and we're going to briefly cover how you're going to go about revising and proofing your research proposal and then submitting it for the very last time at the end of this week on Sunday. And so I'm not going to do a whole lot of lecturing in this EdPuzzle. It's really just going to cover instructions and expectations for this revised lit review. And so I'll just briefly go over the two-step process that you need to do to revise that paper. First, processing the revisions that your reviewers, including me and one of your peer reviewers, did. And then second, how to proof and revise it on your own after you've gone through our edits. Then we'll take a look at the grading rubric and then some tips for completing it and looking into the future for next week. So the first thing you need to do, if you were in PSYC498 with me or the research methods sequence, this is similar to the revision process that we did for your literature review. And so a lot of the notes that you'll see up on Canvas are actually directly from PSYC498. If you weren't in that sequence with us, you're not behind at all. You've got everything you need to do this week, and it's pretty straightforward. And so the first thing to note is that your research proposal with compiled revisions from me and one of your peer reviewers, which includes track changes and comments, is attached to your grade feedback for the research proposal submission. And so I left some explicit feedback in the comments there, and then along with that, I attached two files. One was a Word document with all of your compiled revisions, and the second was an Excel document that includes your graded rubric with additional comments. And so the first thing that you need to do is you need to go and download the document that has your compiled revisions in it. If you haven't already done this and started working on it, what I would like you to do is to download that document, and as soon as you download it, you need to immediately change the file name before you start working on it. You should name it starting with your last name, an underscore, and then revised proposal. And so this is going to allow me to see the types of edits that you did on it and how long you edited the file for. Again, if you've already downloaded it and didn't do this and you already started working on it, it's not a big deal. Just go ahead and keep the file name that you have on it now and don't change it because I'll be able to see all the editing time on that file name. As you're going through, you want to regularly change saves to the paper as you're going through it so that you don't lose any of the revisions or the work that you've done on it. And you don't need to change the file name every time you save it. Some people save multiple versions, and that's not necessary for this. Save multiple versions of file names, like revision 1, revision 2, et cetera, et cetera. For this purpose, that isn't going to work very well. So just pick a file name that makes sense. It needs to definitely not be the file name of the compiled revision file that I attached. So it should not be your last name underscore compiled revisions. Talk more about the file name in a minute. But essentially, we'll look at how Microsoft Word will give us some file properties and information about your paper that I'll be able to see later and use as I'm going through your graded rubric. So anyways, go in, download that document, rename it, and then save it as that name without changing it. Then, using this document, we're going to go through and you're going to process the track changes one by one that both I and your other peer reviewer left on that document. And then you're going to address the comments that are on the paper. And then once you're done with a comment and you've addressed it or taken note of it, if it didn't require you to change anything, then you need to delete it. So at the end of this first step, your paper should look back to normal because you've either accepted all the track changes or perhaps rejected ones you didn't like, and you've addressed the comments and then deleted them. And so one thing I want to state, in case you haven't done a revision with me before, is that you should not be taken back by the number of track changes and comments that you see on your paper. That does not mean if you have a lot on there, necessarily that your research proposal wasn't good. Rather, it's just that I'm providing a lot of explanation about why we're changing things and what types of things we could be changing and should be changing. And so I've screen sharing now an example of a compiled revision so that I can show you on my Microsoft Word briefly how we should go through and accept the track changes one by one and then address the comments. So to look at the track changes, we can see one, track changes will look different on your document depending on how you have the settings set up. And so the easiest view, I think, is to first view all markup, because if you have it on like simple markup or something else, it's not going to show you stuff. And then you won't be able to see what changes you're accepting or possibly rejecting. And so you definitely don't want to look at no markup, and you definitely don't want to look at the original. And so we need to look at all markup so you can see all of the changes from me and your peer reviewer. The second thing is you need to select how you want to show that markup. And so I have everything clicked on, and I prefer to show only comments and formatting in balloons. So what that does is it'll show on the side here things that I or your peer reviewer has formatted for you. And it will also show our comments. And the changes that we actually made to the text that wasn't formatting wise is going to be shown within the text here, okay? And so that's what it looks like to show only comments and formatting in balloons. When we show all revisions in line, it's really, really hard to see any formatting changes. It's actually impossible in some cases. And so it's really helpful to have the balloons over there to the side. So all markup, show only comments and formatting in balloons. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to go through starting at the beginning of the paper and process through the track changes one by one. And then we'll go back and do the comments for the sake of this example separately. You can go through and address the comments while you accept track changes. It's totally up to you depending on how comfortable you are with this process and how many times you've done it before. And so I'm under review here. And so we're going to be using the accept and reject buttons, essentially. One thing you want to make sure before you start messing with your document is that track changes aren't on, okay? Once you start addressing some of the comments and making changes to your paper here, if track changes are on, it's going to track your changes and it's going to mark up your paper so that when you turn the paper back in, it's going to have more track changes on it. And we don't want any track changes on this final draft that you turn in. So track changes needs to be off. Now the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to click accept, and what it's going to do is it's going to start highlighting the track changes. It's starting right here. Let's see if I can get it to start at the beginning of the document. Okay, so I clicked at the beginning of the document, so it started up there. So I'm going to accept, and you'll notice that as I click accept, it's highlighting certain things and taking me through the paper one by one. It'll also highlight and take you through the comments. And so what you want to do first is to accept the track changes one by one. It'll walk you through the document to show you what we've changed, and it will also walk you through the comments as you're going. I don't recommend doing the comments at the same time here, just so that we're not overloading our working memory by trying to do, 3 complex things at one time. But I'm just going through and I'm accepting these track changes one by one. And now, depending on what we were changing, some are going to be more obvious than others. And so here you can see that we were changing the suffix to the word here. And as I click accept, it just gets rid of the mark and makes the change permanent on the paper, gets rid of all the markup. And so essentially you want to go through and do that for the whole paper, which really should only take you about 5 minutes. After you've gone through and accepted all the track changes, you're going to have a bunch of comments here. And so what you need to do then is click on the comment, see the associated text that's highlighted, read the comments, and then if it requests any revisions, like this one says to separate this into 2 sentences, it's too long and it's hard to understand. And so what I would do is I would make that change So I'm going to separate this into 2 sentences. And then after I've read through that and I think that looks better, I'm going to click on this comment. And now instead of, I'm not doing track changes anymore, I'm over here doing the comments. And so you can tell because it has little comment bubbles. So now that I'm done with that comment and I've fixed it, I'm going to delete it. And so you need to do that with all of the comments throughout the paper. Some comments might just point out something that you don't need to change, or some comments may be confusing to you and you aren't sure what to change. So ones that you can't really address, you can delete without making changes. But when I went through and reviewed all of your compiled revisions, I got rid of most of those comments that we couldn't make changes accordingly to. And so almost all of the comments that are on here are going to result in some type of change to the paper. And so after you've addressed all of these comments, let's say I've made revisions to this paper, I'm going to make sure all of the comments are deleted. I've gone through and I've changed everything. I only went through the first half of this paper as an example, but you get the idea that once you accept all the track changes and address all the comments and delete them, your paper starts to look back to normal, and that's the first step of this revising process. So that should be pretty straightforward. Again, don't be overwhelmed by the amount of track changes and comments that are on your paper. If you go through them one by one and do them separately, it's a very reasonable task to tackle. So the next step is to proof your own writing. And so just because your reviewers went through and made suggestions and helped you fix some things in your paper does not mean that your paper is done. Rather, now you need to go through the proofing process on your own for your own paper. And so the first thing to do is to correct any messy errors or anything that resulted from the track changes, okay, in the comments. Putting that many track changes on a document and having track changes from multiple people sometimes can result, after you accept it, in perhaps an error that the person doing the track change didn't notice. Like there's 3 weird spaces after between words, or something like that. And so you need to read through the paper and just make sure there's not anything weird that happened after accepting all the track changes. Next, you need to go through and proofread your own paper. And so that's proofreading, sure, for typos, but we really just did that up here. You need to proofread your paper and make revisions to increase the clarity of your writing, and also to improve the writing mechanics and the grammar. And so there's a bunch of notes up in the Canvas module that are PDFs and you can print out. Again, they're the exact same notes that I provided in PSYC498 I'm not going to lecture on them here, but you can just print out those notes and kind of use them as guidance for things to look out for as you're reading through your paper, improving the writing, both at the paragraph level, sentence level, and clause level. If you really want some guidance on how to use those handouts and you feel lost that you weren't in PSYC498 with us, I have posted on the announcements for this week the link to that lecture where we covered all those handouts and did practices together. And so you can click on that link and kind of hop around our class session that we had that day. Really, you can skip to the middle of it and you can see where I actually lecture on that material. And so that's an option that's available for you in the announcements for this week, but you don't have to, and really the handouts themselves should be sufficient. So the basic things that's outlined in the handouts and that I want you to look out for as you're reading through your paper and revising the writing is repetition and parallel structure, making sure we don't swap out synonyms, making sure sentences that are conveying the same type of information and are related are structured in the same way. Simple and direct writing, so getting rid of extra words or clauses that we don't need and making sure that we're writing in the active voice so that we don't have a hidden subject in there that's not at the beginning of the sentence doing the action. And then, of course, just basic sentence structure, so making sure we don't have incomplete sentences, run-on sentences, and looking at how how and where we should use commas. So the grading rubric is very similar to the rubric that you had on the initial research proposal. You'll notice that all of this stuff here is exactly the same. The point allocations are a little less because this assignment is worth less points than the original one. But it's still heavily weighted in the course, so make sure you take the time to do all of that. But since all of these requirements are exactly the same, you should be able to go into your graded rubric from the research proposal that I attached to your submission and see if you lost points on any of these. If you did lose points on any of these, then you need to go back, look at the comment that would be next to it, see what you need to change, and then fix that so that you get full credit this time around. If you got full credit on something, then it doesn't mean that it means that you don't need to change anything and you did it well enough the first time around, okay? So go ahead and look at your previous rubric, see what you need to change, and make sure that you at least get full credit on all of these things, because that should be very easy and clear what you need to change. So all of those are the same. The two things at the bottom of the rubric here are the new criteria that's coming for this revision. And so you'll see that we have 4 points going towards just your demonstration that you process the track changes and that you address the comments and then deleted them. And so one, I need to see that the comments that requested revisions or changed were addressed. So you made the changes or attempted to satisfy the change that was requested. And then that you also deleted the comment. And so if you submit your final draft and it has any track changes remaining on it or any comments remaining on it, you're going to lose points here. And if you just deleted comments without addressing them, I'll be able to see that too, and you'll also lose points there. The second item in the new criteria here is your own proofing, okay? And so that's after your reviewer revisions, after you've accepted all of our stuff, you've gone back and you've proofed the writing to improve it. Now, you already went through, most of you, and proofed the writing of your literature review, but you should be able to have an even better perspective looking at your literature review now, since you haven't been working with it much this course, and you haven't read it as many times as you did in the research method sequence. And so having that time away from it and not focusing on it as much should make it easier for you to correct errors that we missed the first time. And then as far as all the new content and the method sections, a lot of it needs improvements to the writing. Grammar, structure, clarity, tense, and things like that. And so you have additional points for going and doing that. And so what I will see is I'll go through your compiler revisions and I'll accept everything and get rid of the comments. And then I'll be able to compare that document with the one that you submit and see what types of changes that you made to the writing after our revision, okay? So some helpful tips before we're done here is I want you to make sure that you adhere to the file naming and sharing instructions. And so what that means is that I want you to name the file and then keep it under that name and make revisions to that same file name. Once you click like save as, it'll ask you if you want to replace the file name sometimes. That's fine. Or you can just click save. But what it does is working on the document under the same file name. And by same file name, I mean a new file name that you created when you started doing the revisions. And so after downloading the compiled revisions, you save it under a new file name, preferably your name with an underscore and revised revisions or something similar that makes sense. And then you work on that file name as you go through and do your revisions. If you save the file name as like the same name you had it the first draft, first time around, or you save it as the compiled revisions, the same name that I had when I sent it back to you, more than likely you're going to accidentally attach the wrong file name, or Canvas is going to revert to the previous version of the file for that file name. And so Canvas can actually make errors if you keep using the same file name over and over and submitting it for different assignments. So just be wary of that. But really, the reason I want you to come up and save it as a new file name and then edit under that same file name is Microsoft Word provides me with a lot of information about your file. and if you work under the same file name, I'm going to be able to see all of the work that you did. And so if you go under File and Properties in Microsoft Word, it gives you some interesting information about the file. So here we see this is a file that was edited under the same file name, and so it's very easy for me to see the time that the student put in. We can see it, they downloaded the document and saved it under the new name. So they created it under on this date, and then they last edited it before submitting it on this date, and then I can see the total amount of time that they spent in the document revising it. And so this is really helpful. It'll also show me, say, it'll also show me things like if you are not the author of the document. Now, I know sometimes we use other people's computers and the Microsoft Word might be registered to a different person. But as far as I can see in this course, it seems that everyone's kind of got their own version of it, or I can tell whose computer you're working on. Everyone's fine in this course. But what we can see here is that in this case, this person, for putting the research proposal together, downloaded the template, pasted their stuff in there, and then didn't make any other revisions to it because it only took them 28 minutes to create their entire research proposal. And so a lot of the times you'll also see that sometimes if you just went through and accepted the track changes and deleted the comments and then submitted it, it's going to show that you only edited the document for 10 minutes. And that's obviously not the objective that we're going for in this revision. And so I get a lot of interesting information from here. And so the file should be created by you, which occurs after you save the file of compiled revisions after download under a new file name. And it should indicate all the time that you spent editing it, which is counted by the minutes you spent modifying the file under that name. So sometimes something might go awry. Perhaps you have already changed the file name or something like that, and for whatever reason, the document that you submit doesn't show your editing time. That's very possible to happen. It's not ideal, but I'm certainly not going to count points off for it. But if I can see your editing time, I'll be able to take into consideration perhaps that you spent a lot of time editing the paper, even though it still needed some work to it. And so if you've got a lot of time in the document and it needed some more time proofing, then I won't take quite as many points off if I would have if it showed you were only in the document editing it for 28 minutes and then it still needed work. And so that's just some context that Microsoft Word provides to me that allows me to essentially give you brownie points for effort trying to revise the document, even though it didn't end up being as polished perhaps as we wanted it to be in the end. So that's just some FYI. It's also really important information just to know for work and other courses that your instructors and supervisors and stuff can see everything that's going on in a document in its history. So how long should you plan on doing this? Well, after this EdPuzzle, it really depends on if you needed any significant content changes to your method sections. Not everyone took note of my revisions and my feedback that I put in the discussion, and so we needed some content changes. And so those might take a little bit longer, but in general, this should take you anywhere from like an hour and a half to 3 hours. It'll take you about 15 minutes to go through the track changes, and it'll take you, depending on how many comments are on your paper, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour addressing the comments in your paper, and then at least 1 other hour revising and proofing the paper on your own. Let me see. So one thing you don't want to do is you need to space this out. Do not do this all in one sitting. It's not going to work out very well. You should at least space this out into 2 time points. It should at least be that you sit down one day and handle the revisions that and go through the track changes and address the comments and get the paper back to normal. And then either on a different day or after a break or something, you come back and proof the paper on your own. But you need to put some space and some time in between those two to make it so that you can notice the errors and have a better perspective on the writing when you come back to proof it yourself. If you've already been staring at the paper for an hour and then you come back to proof the writing, you're not going to be able to notice a lot of things. So at least break it up into 2 time points. 3 is even better. So before this EdPuzzle is over, I'm just going to kind of frame what's going on next week so that you can plan ahead. I'm going to try very hard to have most of the content, if not all of the content, up for next week by this week so that you can work ahead in the course and finish it early if you want. But next week, what we have to do is we're going to do the EdPuzzle, which again is instructions, and then you're going to record yourself presenting a PowerPoint presentation of your research proposal. And so this involves multiple steps to doing that. So one is the EdPuzzle. Second is that you have to create the PowerPoint presentation of your proposal. So you actually have to put together the PowerPoint and design it. And there'll be very explicit instructions in the module on how to do that. Then you have to practice your presentation. And so you have to practice what you're going to say on each slide and what you're going to say in general, so that when you record yourself presenting it, it's clear that you are rehearsed and practiced and are well prepared, which is something that you'll be graded on. And the good thing actually about recording your presentation is that if you mess up, you could always go back and do it again. And so you actually have an advantage to this versus having to do these presentations in person or having to do these presentations in a synchronous online meeting, which we typically do. And so there'll be instructions on how to record the presentation, but you need to make time for all of this. It's all separate things. You got to create the PowerPoint, you got to practice your presentation, what you're going to say, and then you got to record yourself presenting it. That's not going to involve you being on camera. Rather, it's going to be a screen share and you narrating just like I am here. And I'll provide you a lot of different methods that you can use to do that. Importantly, and the thing I'm going to end on is to let you guys all know that the courses are over on Saturday. Usually our deadline is on Sunday, but courses for summer session 1 are over on Saturday, July 13th. And then I have to submit grades on Monday morning, July 15th. And so what that means is I have to grade all of your stuff that Sunday. And so the week 8 work is due on Saturday night. Please do not plan on doing it all on Sunday because you can't. That's past the deadline. I would also not plan on waiting till the last minute Saturday night to try to record and submit your presentation. If you have some kind of issue recording it or something like that, then there's not much I can do to help you because the course is literally over that night. And so just make sure you have plenty of time, that you don't wait until Saturday night or, obviously Sunday to complete this stuff. And this is your last paper and presentation in undergrad. You guys are so close and you're going to be done before you know it. So don't fret. This is all pretty easy and straightforward stuff. So I wish you the best of luck on the remainder of your assignments in this course and whatever other course you're taking right now.